She fed an enemy child. The debt changed the war. There are debts that cannot be measured in gold or settled with blood. In the winter of 1878, a woman named Catherine Brennan gave a starving child a bowl of soup in the back room of a dusty trading post. She never asked his name. She never looked at his face long enough to remember it. But that child remembered hers. And 12 years later, when the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted, everyone would ask the same question. How did one bowl of soup decide who lived and who died in the War of the Bitter Valley? This is that story. The Bitter Valley was not named for its landscape, though the land was unforgiving enough. It was named for what men did to each other there. Two cattle empires claimed the same water, the same grass, the same future. On the western side of the valley ran the Brennan family operation, 3,000 head of cattle for line shacks, and a trading post that served drovers, drifters, and anyone with coin enough to buy flour or whiskey. On the eastern side sprawled the Guerin Company, a ruthless syndicate backed by railroad money and Eastern lawyers who turned land disputes into massacres. By the winter of 1878, the tension had already killed 6 men. Fences were cut. Cattle were poisoned. Homesteaders caught between the two sides simply vanished. Catherine Brennan was 24 years old that winter. She ran the trading post because her father, Owen Brennan, could no longer write his own name. His hands shook too badly from old injuries and older whiskey. Catherine kept the books, kept the shelves stocked, kept her mouth shut when dangerous men walked through the door. She had learned early that survival in the Bitter Valley required a certain blindness. You did not ask questions. You did not take sides. You sold goods, took money, and forgot faces. But children were different. It was February, and the snow had turned to frozen mud that clung to everything. Catherine was alone in the post that afternoon. Her father had ridden out to check the northern fence line, and the hired man had gone with him. The store was cold and dim, the stove barely keeping the frost off the windows. She was counting inventory when she heard the sound. Scratching, faint, rhythmic, coming from the back door. Catherine set down her pencil and walked slowly toward the sound, her hand instinctively moving toward the rifle propped behind the counter. But when she opened the door, she found no threat. Just a boy. He was maybe 8 years old, though hunger had made him smaller. His clothes were torn and filthy, his feet wrapped in rags that had once been a shirt. His face was gaunt, his lips cracked and bleeding. He did not speak. He only stared at her with eyes that had seen too much. Catherine should have closed the door. The smart thing, the safe thing, would have been to turn him away. Children did not wander alone in the Bitter Valley unless something terrible had already happened. And terrible things had a way of following. But she didn't close the door. She stepped aside and let him in. He moved like an animal, slow and cautious, his eyes never leaving hers. Catherine walked to the stove and ladled soup from the pot she kept simmering, thin broth with potatoes and a little salt pork. She poured it into a wooden bowl and set it on the table. The boy did not move. "It's yours," she said quietly. "Eat." He fell on it like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. Catherine watched him for a moment, then turned back to her work. She did not ask where he came from. She did not ask his name. Those questions had answers she didn't want to know. When the bowl was empty, the boy stood and walked to the door without a word. Catherine expected him to leave. Instead, he turned back and looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something in his face she couldn't name. Not gratitude, not fear, recognition, as if he were memorizing her. Then he was gone. Catherine told no one about the boy. There was nothing to tell. A hungry child had come to the door, and she had fed him. It was an act of decency, nothing more. She went back to her ledgers, restocked the shelves, and forgot about it by nightfall. But others had not forgotten. 3 days later, a man named Silas Cray rode into the trading post. Cray was a hired gun working for the Guerin Company, a man known for his patience and his cruelty. He was tall and thin, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that never seemed to blink. He bought tobacco and asked about the weather. He paid in silver and left without incident. But before he mounted his horse, he turned back to Catherine and said, "You fed a boy a few days back." It wasn't a question. Catherine's blood went cold. She kept her face blank. "I feed a lot of people." Cray smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This one didn't pay. I don't turn away children. Even Guerin children?" The air in the room changed. Catherine felt the weight of the words, the trap closing around her. She said nothing. Cray tipped his hat. Interesting choice, Miss Brennan. I'll be sure to mention it. He rode east toward Garenland. That night, Catherine's father came home drunk and furious. Word had spread. The Garen Company was telling anyone who would listen that the Brennans were harboring enemies, that Catherine had given aid to a Garen spy. It was a child, Catherine said, her voice tight. A starving child. There are no children in this war. Owen Brennan spat. There are only sides. He was right, and they both knew it. In the Bitter Valley, mercy was a luxury no one could afford. By morning, 2 of the Brennan ranch hands had quit. By the end of the week, a line shack on the southern border had been burned to the ground. The Garen Company was testing them. Catherine tried to keep the trading post running, but fewer people came. Those who did were Brennan loyalists, and they looked at her with suspicion now. She had made them vulnerable. She had chosen compassion over survival. And the boy never returned. Spring came, and with it came violence. A Brennan drover was found dead in a ravine. His horse shot out from under him. A Garen fence crew was ambushed and left for the buzzards. The law stayed away. The law had always stayed away. This was a war fought in silence, in the dark, in the places where no one would ever find the bodies. Catherine stopped sleeping. Every sound outside the post made her reach for the rifle. Every stranger who walked through the door could be the one who finally pulled the trigger. She kept working, kept surviving, but she could feel the debt growing. Unseen, unpaid, waiting. Then the letters started. The first one was slipped under the door of the trading post in the middle of the night. Catherine found it at dawn, a folded piece of paper with no name, no signature. Just 5 words written in a child's careful handwriting. I remember what you did. She burned it. The second letter came a week later, nailed to the post's front door. You gave me life. I will give you the same choice. Catherine tore it down and threw it into the stove, but her hands were shaking. The third letter was pinned to the saddle of her father's horse. When the war comes to your door, remember, mercy is a debt. Owen Brennan read it and said nothing. But that night, he loaded every gun in the house. It was a cattle buyer named Finch who finally told them the truth. He came through the valley in late summer, a man who traded in information as much as livestock. He sat at the counter of the trading post and spoke quietly, as if the walls had ears. You know who that boy was, don't you? Finch said. Catherine's jaw tightened. I don't want to know. His name is Daniel Garen, nephew of Jacob Garen himself. The old man's sister's boy, raised up in the company since he was 6 years old. Catherine felt the floor drop out from under her. That's not possible. He was dressed in rags. Because Jacob Garen sent him out that way, Finch said. Wanted the boy to learn the land, learn to survive, learn who could be trusted. It's a test they do with all the Garen kin. And you, Miss Brennan, you passed a test you didn't know you were taking. What does that mean? Finch leaned in. It means Daniel Garen has been telling his uncle for 12 years that Catherine Brennan is the only person in this valley who showed him mercy. And Jacob Garen, don't forget things like that. Catherine's heart pounded. Then why is this happening? Why the threats? Why the fires? Finch shook his head. Because Daniel Garen is 20 years old now, and he's the one leading the Garen Company's war. The knowledge changed everything. Catherine realized that every letter, every warning, every move the Garen Company had made was connected to that one moment 12 years ago. Daniel Garen had not forgotten her. He had built his entire strategy around her. The Brennans were not just another enemy to crush. They were a test, a moral equation he was trying to solve. And Catherine was the variable. She tried to leave. She packed a bag one night and saddled a horse, planning to ride south to Santa Fe and disappear. But when she reached the edge of Brennan land, she found a man waiting in the dark. It was Silas Cray. Leaving, he asked. This isn't your business. Daniel sent me to give you a message. Cray's voice was soft, almost gentle. He says you can go. He won't stop you. But if you leave, your father dies tonight. Catherine's blood turned to ice. You're lying. Am I? Cray gestured toward the distant lights of the Brennan ranch. There are 6 men surrounding that house right now. They're waiting for my signal. You ride away, I give the signal. You ride back, they disappear. Your choice. Catherine stared at him, hatred burning in her chest. What does he want? He wants you to understand something, Cray said. He wants you to know what it feels like to have your life in someone else's hands. He wants you to know that mercy is not kindness. It's power. Catherine turned her horse and rode back. The war came to the Bitter Valley in the fall of 1890. It was not a war of armies or banners. It was a war of fire and betrayal, of men who killed in the dark and disappeared before dawn. The Guerin Company struck the Brennan Ranch in waves, burning barns, scattering cattle, cutting off supply lines. The Brennans fought back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Catherine's father was killed in the first week. He was shot while trying to defend the trading post, his body left in the dirt as a message. Catherine buried him alone. The trading post became a fortress. Catherine barricaded the doors, loaded every rifle, and waited. The Brennan loyalists who remained gathered there, a dozen men and women with nowhere else to go. They knew they were going to die. They just wanted to take some of the Guerin Company with them. But the attack never came. Instead, Daniel Guerin sent another letter. Come to the ridge at dawn, alone, or everyone you love dies tonight. Catherine rode to the ridge as the sun rose, her rifle across her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. The ridge overlooked the entire valley, a barren stretch of rock and wind where nothing grew. Daniel Guerin was waiting. He was not what she expected. He was lean and hard, with dark eyes and a face that had forgotten how to smile. He wore no gun, no knife, nothing that suggested violence. But Catherine could see it in his posture, in the way he stood. He was a man who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. You came, he said. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. 12 years ago, you gave me a choice. You could have turned me away. You could have let me starve. But you didn't. You were a child. And you were the enemy. Daniel's voice was quiet, but there was something terrible beneath it. Do you know what that soup cost me? Do you know what it did? Catherine said nothing. It made me weak, Daniel said. It made me question every order my uncle gave me, every man I was told to kill. I thought about you. I thought about what you did, and I hated you for it. Then why didn't you kill me? Because I owe you a debt, Daniel said. And debts have to be paid. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Catherine. She opened it. It was a deed, signed by Jacob Guerin himself. It transferred ownership of the eastern half of the Bitter Valley to the Brennan family. Thousands of acres, water rights, everything. Catherine stared at it, her hands trembling. I don't understand. My uncle is dead, Daniel said. I killed him 3 days ago. The Guerin Company is mine now, and I'm ending this war. Why? Daniel looked out over the valley, his expression unreadable. Because you fed a starving child. And that child became a man who had to choose between vengeance and mercy. You made that choice for me once. Now I'm making it for you. He turned and walked away. Catherine stood on the ridge for a long time, the deed in her hands, the wind cutting through her coat. She thought about the boy who had scratched at her door 12 years ago. She thought about the man he had become. She rode back to the trading post and gathered the survivors. She showed them the deed. Some wept, some laughed, some simply sat in silence, unable to process what had just happened. The war was over. The Guerin Company withdrew from the valley. The Brennans rebuilt. The land healed, slowly, painfully, the way land always does after men have bled it dry. Catherine never saw Daniel Guerin again. But every year, on the anniversary of that winter day, she found a letter slipped under the door of the trading post. No signature, no name, just a single sentence. Some debts take a lifetime to pay. In the Old West, a man could be judged by the debts he carried and the ones he chose to settle. Catherine Brennan learned that mercy is the heaviest debt of all, because it binds both the giver and the one who receives it, and neither can walk away until the scales are balanced. She fed a starving child and saved his life. And 12 years later, that child returned the gift in blood, in land, and in a war that ended not with vengeance, but with the terrible weight of gratitude. In the Bitter Valley, they say that kindness is not weakness. It is a sword that cuts both ways, and the man who wields it must be prepared to live with what it carves into the world.